Hey guys, sorry if there was a little bit of dead air. We don't have an intro set up for Secular Literary Circle yet, so I wanted to make sure that I waited out the delay a little bit. Hi, welcome to the Secular Literary Circle. This is a brand new project that Divine Disbelief has started with me on this channel, and they're going to be mirroring the streams. Once they figure out how to do it, they said that they might mirror the streams, or at the very least, like, download the videos and put them on their channel or something, so you guys can see them there too, if you guys are also fans. But yeah, basically, the Too Long Didn't Read for this, haha, is we're doing a book club where we're going to be going either chapter by chapter if they're long enough, or every 2 chapters or so, week by week on Tuesday nights, and going through various books that may be of interest to secular readers. So everything from history to biology to, just general science stuff to maybe even philosophy, if I can finagle Nathaniel into that someday.
That won't happen.
He's like, I'm going to sit those out.
Nope, I will not. I have no interest in philosophy, not even a little bit. You can probably get Shay to do that, and Shay and I imagine Darth Dawkins.
Maybe I can finagle Susan into it then. I don't know.
Try. I'm pretty much always going to be like the layman in every single one of these. Like, I'm going to be the one that does not have quite the knowledge
well, by
this, so...
Well, by science stuff, I mean, we've talked about everything from The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert as being a possibility, to the, Ancestor's Tale by Richard Dawkins, which is significantly less inflammatory than any of his, God delusion stuff, to potentially In the Blink of an Eye, which is about the search for mitochondrial Eve. So, a wide variety of different science topics we may or may not cover. There's lots of different things that are on the table. We've got enough books on our list right now to last the end of the year and beyond.
Yeah, easily.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but there's others that are out there as well that we may, because obviously we won't get to all of those, and we may never read some of them, but there are others out there. And we're really excited to be able to do this, though, because I think that... So I'll say this is really easy to do. Hey, atheists, you don't know a goddamn thing about Christianity. So now we go and learn you.
That's true.
So
that is a fair assessment.
I have spoken with a lot of you, and I don't think any of you have ever read, or many of you have never read any scholarship. And so that was my reason for coming to do this. So.
Well, and mine was a lot of people, atheists, pagans, agnostics, folks kind of in the middle. Also, they might have studied a lot of the arguments for and against things like young earth creationism and the like, but they might not have actually read, either papers or books written on these things, not in any level of depth or not beyond maybe 1 or 2. And so I wanted to get into some of the nitty gritty for things like, how we know that we share a bunch of DNA with, fellow species and stuff like that, or, what caused the Cambrian explosion. These things, just as a nerd, make me happy inside. And so a mix of learning history from Nathaniel's suggestions and Susan's suggestions, and learning science stuff from a lot of my library that I haven't gotten around to reading or haven't read in many years, I think it'll be a lot of fun. And getting to read it alongside you guys, that means that you guys are going to get an education as well.
Yeah,
I'm not going to say what you said. I dismiss Christian scholarship. You shouldn't do that. Most scholars of early Christianity are Christians, and they're very good. I accept most of their work as valid, and they're not theologians, so they don't deal with the theology. And that's a big thing, because I don't deal with theology either. I see people all the time in Discord servers and in these chat things talking about the theology of Christianity. Well, that doesn't matter to me. I'm not a Christian. I deal, and I only dismiss scholarship that is bad scholarship. And I think actually Digital Hammurabi, that's like their tagline, dismiss bad scholarship. If a Christian has great scholarship, like Bruce Metzger, great scholarship, and those kind of things, absolutely love their work. Don't share their religious philosophy, but absolutely share, love what their work is. And I've read a lot of their books and stuff, and they're also really good at putting aside any of these notions of people that attempt to take scholars out of context. And we see that a lot in certain areas, especially of non-scholarship. So
Yeah, they do that a lot with Stephen Jay Gould in particular when you're looking at like scientific works. They tend to like to quote Wonderful Life quite a lot, completely out of freaking context. And like, I liked Vice Rhino's kind of series that he did on that stuff. I know that that's not the same as historical scholarship, but it's the same kind of problem.
Yeah, looking at this and going into things like this, I was actually talking to Chris Hansen about that today, because we both have a history in science, and now we both moved over to this, ancient Near East type of religious history stuff. And so there's the difference in doing the study is quite stark. So, and this book kind of gets into that a little bit, where the history of the stuff without going into scholarship, like without being a scholarly book. And that's, a lot of Dr. Ehrman's books are like that. If you don't know who he is, by the way, he is the James A. Gray Distinguished Professor of Religious Study at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And he has, over the course of his very, very extensive career, I guess, and what he's done, he's written, I think, 20 some odd books that have been on New York Times bestseller lists.
Wow.
And yeah, they include things like Did Jesus exist? The answer is yes. Say Jesus existed and then not believe in Christianity.
And that's going to be one of the books that will come up later on, potentially as an option. So going back to kind of how the show is going to be structured.
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
So each episode is going to be, again, between 1 and 2 chapters of whatever book we happen to be reading. When we get to, say, the last 2 to 4 chapters of the book, we'll probably put up a poll for anybody who's in the chat at the time of, a couple of different books to choose from off of our list. And you guys will get to pick which book we cover next. That way people have at least a week or 2 to get their hands on it. And for those of you who are concerned about being able to get your hands on the books, we have a link to this one in the description. The ebook is only $14.99, which is a bit expensive for ebooks in general, but it's fairly cheap compared to the $28 hardcover. There are publishers' coupons that you can sometimes get from Simon & Schuster, where if you want the physical book, they'll drop the price by 20 to 25%. If you look on coupon websites, they put them up all the time. But while you're in lockdown, I've been using our library quite a bit, because a lot of libraries, if you go to their websites and you sign up for an account, you put in your library card number, they offer ebooks that you can check out from their website. There might be a wait on it, but if you don't have the money to spare for a book, a lot of the time these books are going to be in libraries. This one was in mine. And you guys can get books for free for that through that way. And the library paid for a license to have it. So.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Support your local libraries.
Yeah, libraries need it too.
Yeah.
Like the Postal Service needs your help right now.
Exactly.
And by the way, Nakasuchi, yes, we're talking about the same thing. I don't use the word magic. I use the word supernatural. But yes, we're talking about the exact same thing. And he didn't believe he was a god either. So there you go. I think that's true. But yeah, cool. Very, very excited to do this.
Yeah. So you said you really, really wanted to tackle like the preface and go into the stuff, right?
Yes. So the preface or introduction, if you will, is not usually covered in book clubs for fair reason. It simply is just a little side note by the author, maybe some addendum type stuff, and things that don't really go over very much. But I found this to be important to myself, or to me, is because I think if you are a secular person in the United States, and you were once religious, you have more in common with Dr. Ehrman than you think you do. I found that out to myself as well. And I also noticed, by the way, that I'm wearing the shirt that you were wearing in the
on the thumbnail.
In the thumbnail,
yeah.
Yes. So
well, and it's interesting, even as a theist, I actually found his relating about that absolute terror of the afterlife. I found that I agree to quite a bit with it, like that kind of latent thing that follows you when you leave your faith.
Yeah, I was going to say the quote, but you are absolutely right. You are 100% correct, because he was an Episcopalian. He became basically evangelical. I know you also were there.
Same thing.
after he became like an evangelical, born again Christian whenever he was a teenager, and then he saw it as his mission to spread the word of God to people because he didn't want to go to hell. And then after high school, he went off and actually went to Moody Bible Institute and to Wheaton College. And I didn't go to any of those. I went to the Navy.
That's true.
But I was still a Christian there. And then whenever I got out of the Navy, before I went back to school, I was doing some seminary type stuff, not actual seminary. I get asked that a lot whenever I tell people that youth pastor, because he was also a youth pastor while he was at Moody. Oh. And it was more of like a Methodist. I was a youth pastor at an evangelical church, so a little different there.
Yeah.
And then then he went to Princeton Theological Seminary. And so you have a more liberal, let's call it. So you have Moody Bible and Wheaton College are both very evangelical. And so what you get from there is a inerrancy type thing. And you get a lot of times you get the not necessarily young earth creationist type things, but you definitely get more of the intelligent design type stuff. Mm-hmm. And then you go to Princeton Theological Seminary. And what you find is what he found there. And what, by the way, if in the event that I do continue my aspiration there of going there, like this do School of Divinity or, some of those other places, the one in Boston is great. Then you find that these people who are Methodist or they're Presbyterian don't hold to an inerrancy gospel. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they don't even hold to the fact that Jesus even claimed to be a God, mm-hmm. which I hold to that. And that's where he started to have those doubts. And then it's like mid-20s. This is a basic thing with me. And mine, of course, was because I was looking at this stuff and I figured out like, wow, I take everything else. I don't take anything else at face value. Why do I take this? It's a lot of the same thing. And then and as Ali mentioned, he had like this fear of the afterlife. If he stopped believing in his religion and stuff, what would happen? Basically, an internal Pascal's wager type thing. And you laugh and you mock Pascal's wager, but it's a very serious thing. Internally, it is, because it's something that you believe for a very long time. So don't mock people who consider Pascal's wager. Show them how it's flawed, but don't mock them, right? Because it's very difficult. If you were a Christian before and you went through that, you had that same thing. Don't mock people about it today. And and then he became. Then he actually now he does say he's an atheist. I actually heard him say it like last week. For the longest time, he went off on the agnostic type thing. Mm-hmm. But he did say, he really kind of qualifies as an atheist now. And so he is. We have the same kind of like experience there. He certainly has done other things.
You're getting to those things, though.
I will never. I don't think he has done things that I don't think I'll ever be able to attain. And
I think a good rule of thumb is just in general be as much like Bart Ehrman as possible.
That is a good idea.
It's a good rule of thumb, personally, I think.
Say I reject everything Paul wrote. Nah, man, Paul. The history of the church is because of Paul of Tarsus. So I trust quite a few things actually that Paul says. None of the supernatural stuff, mind you. But yeah.
Hey, Mark Salazar, welcome to the book club.
That's basically the preface. The rest of it, he talks about what he's going to get into in the book, and so.
Yeah, I never really had the sort of deep-seated fear of heaven, of hell, and this idea of heaven and hell. And I don't know if it's just because I wasn't like super like reading the Bible and stuff like that. I was never a good Christian in that respect.
Well, I think that even if you read the Bible a ton, though, there's not a lot of mention of eternal punishment in the Bible in general, and that's part of what this book kind of gets into, is most of where you get that fear of hell comes from the pulpit rather than from the text itself. It mentions things a couple of times, but like the actual text there's a lot of commentary on what you should and shouldn't do as a person, but as far as punishment goes, there's only a few mentions of it.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. So, do you have anything else to add on the
that was
introduction?
No, because then he gets into what he's going to talk about in the book. So.
Yeah, and so in chapter one is called Guided Tours of Heaven and Hell. Nathaniel mentioned to me earlier that, and I completely agreed, that there was an opening passage talked about this discovery in Egypt and of the apocalypse with Peter and stuff like that.
Yeah, 1886.
This discovery, and it really is a very, very beautiful piece of prose that really shows how good of a writer Bart Ehrman is. Even when he's not doing just the technical stuff, he's just a really, really great writer. This book is like everybody else has said, it's a very, very readable book.
Yeah, like the prose. He starts off. He tells the way that these folks, I believe they're French, in 1886 when they were in Egypt, and they're actually digging in the cemetery, which is great. And he tells this story about this, and it engages you, right? It's like they found, First Enoch and the Gospel of Peter and the Apocalypse of Peter, which, by the way, those are 3 bits of apocrypha that should have made it. The books of Enoch are phenomenal. They didn't like that though, because Enoch was a god. He never died, and so and you get this like, and the Gospel or the Apocalypse of Peter was overtaken by the Apocalypse of John.
Oh, guys, you cut out pretty badly there on my end, and it looked like it happened on the playback on YouTube, so you might want to repeat like your last 2 sentences.
Oh, no.
Wait, I don't know why that's happening.
Yeah, I don't know. It's good. It's stupid Wi-Fi.
What are you gonna do?
So the Apocalypse of Peter, you're saying, basically.
Yeah, it was. It was the first. It was really the first Revelation type book there, and it was the earliest. It was the progenitor, if you will, of Dante's Divine Comedy, and it was replaced by fucking Apocalypse of John, and as yes, is the Book of Revelation, and I love the Gospel of Peter, which doesn't get into in this book for good reason, because it has nothing to do with heaven and hell. It's just the passion narrative according to Peter, and by the way, it wasn't written by Peter. It was written centuries later. Just like
he actually covers in this section that the Apocalypse of Peter was written by a later author who was claiming to be Peter.
Yeah, like in like the 2nd century.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's an interpolation. An interpolation is pseudepigraphical. It's a fancy word for motherfuckers forged it.
So do you think that's really a way that they were trying to convince anybody who found it that this was Peter's idea of heaven and hell?
Yeah. This is something that they would do in the past anyways, to like, forgery was really common, but they really didn't like it. And this is the way they would add some of the gravitas. Peter, the number 1 disciple, wrote this. This comes from, Cephas himself, or Cephas, don't at me. It hit right there himself. And so you look at this, that means that it basically came from God. And it's the same thing with 1st and 2nd Peter that are in the Bible right now, where they'll say that Peter actually this stuff. He didn't. But it's basically that type of a concept. And so when you put those words on them, much like, Second Thessalonians and stuff, it's got Paul's name on it, but it wasn't written by Paul.
Right.
And so a lot of that's just like this, where it adds that additional, it matters more because it comes from the first people.
Do you guys want to actually read that little bit of introduction? Because it's only about a page, and it's actually so beautifully written. I think it would be a great example to, folks who are kind of on the fence about getting the book, about why this is such an excellent read. Like, even if we just read that opening paragraph.
He's not laughing from Chris H. Can you highlight that last one?
Don't highlight that. Don't do that.
Please.
Oh my God, Chris. So I'm so sorry, everybody.
Enjoy that.
That is unprofessional of me. I am so sorry. I shouldn't laugh. I shouldn't laugh. Gospel of Thomas is not something we talk about in this, but I can talk about it like in a different. If you want to get at me on the DM on Twitter, I can.
He's talked a lot about them on the Periscope streams.
Yeah, But go ahead.
Yeah, I think I don't know. Let me see how long it is.
Even just the little first
like
paragraph that you kind of praised there, the one where he describes in the winter season of 1886, that entire paragraph is just beautifully written, and I think it's a great hook for the book overall.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll read that.
Yeah.
Uh-oh, you guys like froze out completely on my end. He's a good writer.
He's a very writer. So just focused on how.
You guys are back. The camera's frozen, but I can hear you again.
Okay. Oh no.
What? What is
yeah, and on the YouTube playback, it looks like you guys are freezing like you are on my end too, so it looks like it's the same.
Oh no.
What is going on here?
See, now it looks okay on the YouTubes. Okay.
We can't even find the other
tube of views.
Sorry.
Oh, do we have a 5G?
No.
Darn it. All right. Okay. So
are we still frozen?
Nope, you guys are unfrozen. Your audio keeps like bugging out every so often, but your video's back to normal.
Yeah. Okay.
Hold on.
Hey guys, so sorry about the technical difficulties. This is the camera stuff that was kind of delaying the stream getting started earlier.
Yeah.
You guys didn't burn your fucking RAM sticks, and now the tech gremlins have invaded your laptop and your router.
I blame Ocean.
It's true.
Ocean did a premiere video and stream today, and in that vein, realized that somebody else was doing a stream, and he sent those fuckers over here.
Either that or the rest of possum stole my offering, and it just didn't count for you guys.
You're like, I tried. I swear I tried.
I tried,
By the
but
way,
they
I've
were
used
stolen.
I've used this since the beginning of March, so I don't do the single-use plastics.
No, he's been refilling that.
So,
for the record,
I am a hypocrite.
So, because I am probably going to need both of y'all's help in terms of what I am going to pronounce wrong, because I already know I'm going to. So this is the first paragraph. In the winter season of 1886 to 87, a French archaeological team digging in Akhmim, Egypt, about 80 miles north of Luxor, made one of the most remarkable manuscript discoveries of modern times. The site was a cemetery. The archaeologists were digging in a portion dating to the 8th century CE. In one of the tombs, taken to be that of a Christian monk, they discovered a 66-page book written in Greek and containing a small anthology of texts. One of them was a portion of a Jewish apocryphon known today as First Enoch. Enoch, right?
Enoch.
Okay.
It's my man.
Another was a previously unknown gospel that provided an alternative version of Jesus' trial, death, and resurrection, allegedly written by his closest disciple, Peter. A third was also a book claiming to be by Peter, which in some respects was the most intriguing of all. This was an account, written in the first person, of a guided tour of the afterlife, a detailed description of the torments of sinners in hell, and, in far less detail, the blessings of saints in heaven. It is the earliest Christian forerunner of Dante's Divine Comedy.
It went again. I don't understand. It's got to be the internet.
Are we?
Hallie?
Yeah, you're back. You froze for a sec. You froze at the end of the word divine comedy, and then came back when you guys were commenting that it had to be your net. So that last couple sentences, I think you need to finish, or that last sentence.
Yeah. So Dante's Divine Comedy, and the most authoritative such account ever to appear, allegedly authenticated by one of Jesus's own apostles.
So
I love it. Such good writing.
Yeah, it's an excellent sort of it shows a lot of the skills that you need to write a engaging narrative essay, but it's the hook to a fascinating book on history. And this is like indicative of the style that you find throughout this book. It's an extremely easy read. And what he tends to do throughout, and what we're going to cover as we go through, is he tends to take the text that he's talking about and he'll quote from them a little bit, but he mostly summarizes and then kind of talks about them and what that ultimately meant and what effect they had on believers. So it's very conversational.
Yeah. And I'm very guilty of always reading way too fast. And I found myself able to actually slow down and read this because I wanted to read it so much. Slowing down and reading it.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to read it so much. Yeah.
It's a good read.
So the first section of chapter 1 is called The Realms of the Damned and Blessed. So I mostly just have questions on a lot of this stuff. So there's, I guess my first rule of question is
you went totally robot, guys. Like you're still there.
Of Peter and how it's
it's just not gonna work.
No, we're gonna fight through.
You guys might have to turn your camera off. That might make it a little bit less bandwidth. It'll suck, but
I'm gonna try it.
We've never had this issue. I'm guessing they're mine.
They might be streaming. We're doing
probably doing something.
Yeah, I don't know.
Fucking know. We told them they're streaming, so they probably tried to download stuff from the internet.
You never know. So talk with the apocalypse of Peter, when it's basically this account, like it's this sort of very graphic account of Jesus on the Mount of Olives talking about what happened when the world ends.
Tell me we stayed. Okay.
I
switched something. Hopefully it works.
Hopefully we're better now.
Oh, you guys are coming through a lot clearer again, but we'll see how long it lasts. But like the little bit of stuttering that was still in your video before has gone away completely.
Good. Okay, cool. So since this was Apocalypse of Peter and he, Jesus Mount of Olives talking about the end of the world and stuff.
Yeah. That's in Matthew and Mark, by the way.
Yes. Have there been, do you know, or do either of y'all know if there have been like comparisons done between the Apocalypse of Peter and the Apocalypse of John?
Yeah.
Have there been like major deep dives into it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is Bart Ehrman one of them?
Not in that respect. Well, yes, but not in the respect that I think that people would want to read. But there's certainly similarities between the two. Yeah. And that was why for the first 4 centuries, it was a contentious thing. This was the one that was originally, the Apocalypse of Peter was originally thought by most of them, at least, to belong inside of the Bible, inside of the New Testament. And again, it was replaced later on. And part of that is because it wasn't it wasn't written by Peter. But then again, with that being said, half of the New Testament's not either it's anonymous or not written by the person that it says.
That's true.
So I don't know why they care about that much. But talking about like stars falling from the sky and the idea of like the heavens rolling up and stuff that you read in the book of Revelation, which is very, very specific because of their view of what the earth was like. That's not in there. But yeah, the Clement, I love that Clement did that, especially in first. We can read a lot of things like about this, like in First Clement and stuff, and that's very, that's very early on. But you can certainly see similarities between the two, but you can also see the difference between when they were written at that point as well, because you start knowing about things that happen later on and stuff.
Oh, that's really cool.
And Jesus coming back and stuff doesn't happen until the. I don't want to use the word like dissolving of the creation, but that's pretty close to, and obviously in John's apocalypse that happens at a different time. And the idea of this is more of a description about what happens after you're judged, more than anything else, more than what John's apocalypse has with these ideas of apocalypse is coming and these are the tribulations and stuff like that. This one really gets more into this is what's just going to fucking happen, and then all the dead is going to rise. So it doesn't really necessarily talk much about whether or not people are going to be saved at the end, but rather that
it's more meant to like scare you. I wanted to cut in and let you guys know your tech issues are completely gone. Whatever you did was magic.
It shows a different Wi-Fi. And then you know, and then it really gets into, you have the judgment that occurs. So the judgment occurs in both books, but it occurs in an incredibly different way. And again, I like this one more because the 21 different, it goes over 21 sins. And these are the sins, by the way, that are most likely to have been committed by you, right? So whatever you sin the most, whether you took interest on a loan, which, by the way, is a sin. So
some of them are
all you bankers out there.
Yeah, Bart actually covers a few of them in, you know, toward the bottom of the first page of the Realms of the Damned and the Blessed.
Yeah.
He goes so, and he gets into, he actually shows in there that the Apocalypse of Peter goes like a page basically on heaven, and then the rest of it is the damned. And he mentions that if a woman kept her hair long and then braided it and put it up so that she would use it to seduce men into fornication, by the way,
of course,
then they'd be damned for eternity, and they'd be hung up by their hair for eternity. And then
it seems so uncomfortable. And
then the men who they seduced, they were hung up by different body part.
Yeah.
With the quote from him being, in their case, they make the perpetual lament, we did not know we would come to everlasting punishments. Indeed.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and there's other ones in there too where very, very, he mentions very, very, like, they call it infanticide. It's basically if you kill or murder children.
Oh yeah, if you leave the kid out to the elements, right?
Yeah. So if you have a child,
that was commonly done by ladies of the night at the time.
Yeah. But if you have a child and then you just, you know, toss it out to the wolves, you would be damned as well. And that one, I think you were in that one. Because if you had abortions, which is not the way that it's written, but whatever, you'd be up to your neck in like piss and shit, and then your the what would have been your child is there laughing at you and shooting lightning bolts into your eyes like Palpatine, and then if you threw out your your baby, then you would be. What is the other? I forget what the other one is with that, but he mentions it.
Here's the quote. So too, men and women who committed infanticide, i.e. by exposing unwanted children to the elements, are tormented forever while their murdered children look on from a place of delight. The mothers experience a particularly graphic torment. Milk flows perpetually from their breasts and congeals. Out of the milk comes beasts that devour the parents' flesh.
There you go. Yeah, and all this other stuff. And then this goes on. He mentions this goes on for eternity, and he does a really good job of explaining this, by the way. And then he mentions that one of the things about this that is most anti-Jesus is that if you're in heaven, you can see this happening, and the person that does this is full of joy.
Right. It's basically like Schadenfreude, like heavenly Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
And
except unless you're like the babies, then
you're
down there in
force lightning.
Yeah, it doesn't explain hell very well, but it certainly is considered this, like, it has levels of it basically. This has to do with this is the same thing as what you get with like when Paul went up to the third heaven and stuff. There's different levels of heaven. Same concept here, and this is of course where the Divine Comedy took his stuff from. And you go down these different levels of yeah, down into these different levels of what would be considered hell now.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if you blasphemed God, like straight up blasphemed and said there was not a God or something like that, they'd stab you in the eyeballs with you'd be in a place of darkness.
Yeah.
And they'd stab you in the eyeballs with iron, with heated iron, over and over and over again. Which, by the way, would make it so that it's not darkness, but whatever.
Well,
it's red.
He also goes out of his way to point out, though, that there's kind of an inherent hypocrisy in this. He says on my copy, it's pages 17 and 18. Seeing your enemies horribly tortured for eternity is apparently considered one of the greatest joys possible. This may not exactly be consistent with Jesus' instruction to love your enemies, but texts like this regularly suggest that whatever the earthly Jesus might have advised his followers, God himself has other plans. Once a person dies in sin, that is the end. There are no chances to repent. What awaits is some well-deserved torment for all of eternity.
Yeah, that's the anti-Jesus type of mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the opposite of the meek and mild, turn the other cheek, love your enemies type Jesus.
Yeah, it really is.
Which then, you can tell that's, again, not just the fact that Peter was an illiterate lay person, but also because as a follower of Jesus, he wouldn't have said these things.
Yeah. I did like that he's Dr. Ehrman, correct?
He is Dr. Ehrman.
Okay,
yes.
just making sure that I didn't just say Ehrman. Dr. Ehrman.
Yeah.
Dr. Ehrman does specifically say, like, the whole, like, the seemingly primary purpose of the apocalypse of Peter is not to, like, give us exact ideas of heaven and hell, because we still have that vagueness to where our minds can, like, fill in as we see fit. But it's really just to scare people out of sinning. It's sort of like what you do for little kids, like, to scare them so they don't do something. Mm-hmm. Which is
there's a brilliant line in that paragraph when he says he's not so much scaring the hell out of people as scaring people out of hell.
Exactly. Yeah, I really like that one too.
Yeah, it's the Turner Burn stuff.
Yeah. And I wrote a specific little note, and vagueness actually really does serve a purpose, because do you want to be all tortured and shit, or do you want to just fill in the blanks with whatever your idea of heaven would be?
Yeah. So. Well, there's only so many ways you can explain heaven. Like, it's great, and there's a lot of joy, and you're always happy, and nothing ever goes wrong.
Yeah.
And after a while, you just, like, run out of, like, superlatives.
Yeah.
Hell, though. Oh, man, you can make all this crazy shit up.
Right?
Be like, this is what this is.
Yeah.
And that's why it's a lot easier for people when they say, 7 minutes in heaven, right? No, all you guys out there. No, it's if that's what heaven is, maybe I want to go. But 7 minutes, come on, I don't last that long. The if you get like these people and they have these visions of near-death experiences and stuff, and they go to heaven, it's always the exact same really short fucking sentence, right? It's always like this: I saw grandma or whatever the fuck,
Heaven's cool.
Which great.
It's beautiful. It's bright. It's well lit. That's the one thing we know about heaven for sure. It is very well lit.
Exactly.
But you get these ideas. Then you get the people though that like they spent 6 minutes in hell or whatever, and it's like these huge, like enormous,
just like long ass
like Stephen King type books full of shit. And it is because it's so much easier to describe torment, to describe agony and anguish that goes on for, because you can just invent shit.
Yeah.
Well, it's not just that, though. One could say that suffering is universal. If you get your eyes stabbed out, you're going to feel the same pain. I mean, unless you've got a disorder that frags your nerves or something, you're going to feel the same pain that I do. But what makes you happy and what makes me happy are totally different. So if you're looking to convert people, converting them by fear is probably going to be a lot more effective than trying to convert them by pleasure.
Agreed.
Yep. And I think that he makes the point as well. I don't think it's right now, sorry, to where he actually says that it's that fear of death.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Just so you know.
Yep.
Been over this a lot. But yep.
Yeah.
Well,
so do you say this perpetua? Is that how you say that?
Yeah, perpetua.
Okay. So this is you taking this, right?
Yeah, so one of the more interesting bits in this first chapter for me was the heavenly vision of Perpetua, because of just how different it was from Paradiso, which a lot of people have read Inferno, but most people kind of get bored halfway through Purgatorio and don't actually go to Paradiso, so a lot of people don't really know how crazy it is. It's nutty. It's not boring, but it's kind of weird. Like, Dante turns all of the different, like, planets into various spheres of heaven that represent different things. It's really crazy. So going through here and kind of seeing a different view of heaven, this sort of idea of and even Perpetua, according to Ehrman, doesn't actually describe heaven all that much. It describes the arduous journey to get there more than the actual, like, where Dante, in Paradiso, he might bore you a bit, but he does actually go into descriptions of it. With Perpetua, it's more this detailed description of all of the different things that can get between you and getting to go to this, like, perpetual paradise. Mm-hmm. So the intro to this section says, the book called The Passion of Perpetua was written in Latin and is one of the most moving pieces of early Christian literature, an allegedly first-hand account of time in prison experienced by a Christian awaiting trial and executions. Scholars remain divided on whether the diary is genuine or, more likely, a later literary ploy claiming to be from Perpetua's own hand. Whether authentic or not, the account is filled with verisimilitude and provides a unique glance into the hopes, expectations, and literally dreams of Christians in a world of animosity, hatred, and persecution. So a lot of people comment that in the modern day Christians have a persecution complex, and part of that stems from claiming this sort of, like, the actual persecution that happened of Christians during this era in history. And so this idea...
I think it's a myth, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's at least some records that these things were done.
Yeah, but not, like, by the Roman Empire.
Maybe. We can talk about that another time.
I mean, yeah, you can be wrong all you want. That's fine.
We can go into after show.
No, I say maybe because it's not something that I'm as well educated in as you, and I will cede to your knowledge on that.
Thanks.
I do that a lot. Do that very, very often.
Right, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
So Ehrman actually continues down to talk about, so Perpetua was apparently a 22-year-old convert who was still kind of being educated when she was arrested. Her teacher was arrested as well, but it says that she was probably arrested in a town in North Africa around 203 CE, as far as, like, the account is concerned. So she also talks about, like, the pressure of her father constantly trying to pull her out of the faith. Like, just recant, you'll be fine if you do, and she won't. And so it makes a lot of sense that this sort of idea of a ladder to heaven, which Ehrman kind of goes into detail, would be her account of how you get to heaven. It talks about how there's this tall ladder leading up so narrow that only one person can climb it at a time. In other words, each person who wants to reach heaven must do so on the basis of their own will and decisions. So this is kind of interesting that this sort of portrayal of heaven is so individualistic, because in the modern day, a lot of the fundamentalist churches that, folks like Knock and I like to argue against, they have this very groupthink mentality. If you're not our kind of Christian, then you're not going to get to heaven. But this very much, emphasizes, at least in Ehrman's estimation, that no, groupthink isn't going to get you there. It's your own learning and your own righteousness, your own steadfastness, your own sticking to the faith that will do this. Mm-hmm. So she describes a bunch of different metal weapons that are sticking to the side. So if you don't pay attention, you could get cut or knocked off the ladder. And in the background, Satan is basically flying around as a gigantic dragon who is trying to scare the crap out of you. And if you are strong in your faith, you'll know that he poses no threat to you because Jesus is protecting you. But if you're not, he might scare you off the ladder and you'll fall down and end up in, wherever you go. She doesn't really describe hell. She talks more about heaven. But, she makes it all the way up the ladder. And she talks about a man named Satyrus, one of her companions. He was one of her teachers. She says he looks it down from the heavenly height and urges Perpetua to come up as well, warning her, "Do not let the dragon bite you." Perpetua assures him that the dragon will not harm me in the name of Jesus Christ. So again, sort of this idea that you can't be harmed so long as you're faithful. So this is more of a message of hope, which I think, again, is very interesting compared to, like, when you look at Paradiso, where Paradiso, there's some descriptions of beauty and hope there, but I don't know, it doesn't have this sort of tone of you can do it that it feels like this story does, if that makes sense. Like, this feels like, you know, she's kind of encouraging you, like, hey, it's going to be hard, but you can make it. So I think it's really interesting kind of how this has shifted.
Yeah, like it still has that same sort of element of the scary stuff, but I agree that it does have more of a message of hope than than guys being hung by their genitals.
Yeah, it's an interesting probably I think it's an interpolation because this obviously would have had the idea. This would have read, this person that wrote this, or persons that wrote this would have read these other materials, and so but yeah, it's it gives the I like the way that he kind of really explains it in general regarding the personal type of connection that one would have with the afterlife.
Yeah.
And so I really do like that.
Yeah.
And I like the story anyways. It's not all that long. You can read it. I think you can probably find it online. I don't know.
Probably.
I've read it. No.
You've read everything.
No, not even close.
So the ending of the story is she gets up to the top and she runs into a shepherd in an immense garden. She describes him as a gray-haired man in shepherd's garb, milking sheep. And Ehrman goes into some of the details about why it would be described this way. And I'll just read the last sort of paragraph of the story. Around the shepherd are thousands of people clad in white, others of the saved who have already made the heavenly ascent. Christ greets Perpetua and tells her that he is glad she has come. He gives her milk in her cupped hands, and she drinks it while all around her say amen. This seems like a Eucharistic meal, but why milk? One might think that it's because that's what sheep naturally produce, but there's more to it than that. Milk is the nourishment given to a newborn. Perpetua is now to be reborn into eternal life. She wakes up and tells her brother the news. They will not be released from prison, but are to suffer and die, and so find their eternal reward. They will be martyred.
Yeah, and that's part of the difference that we see, the switch over from the classical Greek idea of martyrdom into this Christian idea where they basically would try to throw themselves upon the if you're like recently into the guillotine, do it. I want to die type stuff. I want to die for Jesus type bullshit.
Yeah.
And it's completely different than this is an example of that. I really like that he put that in there too, because especially with, as I think you guys are definitely going to get into when he starts talking about Socrates, or his real name, Socrates.
Socrates.
So see if any of you out there are old enough to get that reference.
So it's interesting, though, because you kind of started talking about the dark side, and that's the literal next section called The Afterlife of Martyrs, where he opens up by saying, the tale of Perpetua is beautiful and moving. At the same time, it has an unintended dark side. Here's a well-educated, cultured, and thoughtful young woman who is willing to throw away her life, despite the needs of her child and the love of her family, for the sake of her religious commitment.
Yeah, that's a little note that I put sort of before, was sort of like, well, I mean, if you're not following this sort of narrow view of it, but then at the same time, she focuses so much on the heaven and the reward aspect of it that it's sort of like,
exactly,
it's hard to focus on much else, because it is very hopeful.
Yeah, if you if you're martyred, but it's the I actually kind of like how he puts that there, because there is a stark difference. That's something that, and this really gets into, again, the type of things that we need to be able to do that not a lot of people can do. Again, this is where I'm speaking very directly to a lot of people that I sometimes share a microphone with who, and by a microphone, I mean, y'all motherfuckers got a Twitter, who don't read this stuff, that like these actual not this, but these writings, and can't, the type of literary devices that they used, and the type of ways that they'd say things, it's completely different than it is today.
That's true.
And so we have, and so learning this stuff really gives us an idea of, and as Bart says in this, the idea of what it was actually like. And instead of going around and kind of mocking these ideas of heaven and stuff, you can't mock the disciples for this. They didn't believe this bullshit.
Yeah, it wasn't their thing.
Yeah, no,
it wasn't their thing at all.
And so, I really appreciate that he mentions that over and over and over again.
Yeah,
that he mentions this is not what Jesus preached. This martyrdom stuff, this is not a Jesus thing.
No.
These ideas of the type of heaven that they made up are not real. And so, I appreciate that he continues to hammer that home.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of that.
Yeah.
Well, and he even actually mentions Marcus Aurelius, who, as a Stoic, I have problems with people who cite him as a fucking source on Stoicism. He was a student, stop it. However, as a work of literature, or even as a diary, like an ancient piece, Meditations is fascinating. And he quotes Meditations a little bit, like when he talks about how he maligned Christians who insisted on dying out of obstinacy. And he gives the actual quote, Meditations 11:3. He also talks about Lucian of Samosata, spoke of Christians as wretched people who have convinced themselves that they will be immortal and live forever, which leads the majority of them to despise death and willingly give themselves up to it.
Yep. Yeah, we have stories of that trying to be the case.
Yeah.
Where the mythology now is that, they were persecuting the Christians, when in fact we have stories of groups of Christians going up to somebody like Aurelius, right? And yelling, he's like standing outside of his house, basically on his lawn, with basically with pitchforks, but the opposite of pitchforks, with like nooses around their own necks, saying, "We want to die." And Aurelius was like, "I want to go to sleep. Get the fuck out of here." Yeah. And so I appreciate that he put that in there.
Yeah.
Because it really shows that these people, like, not only were they, if you read the martyrdom of Polycarp, which, by the way, it's good. Come on. he's on a fucking, like a funeral pyre, basically. And he starts like preaching while he's on fire, and the fire can't even kill him type bullshit. That's this type of mentality. And I appreciate that he put that in there.
Yeah. Because
this persecution narrative that comes from like modern day Christians is not real.
Yeah, that's true.
And especially evangelicals.
Yeah.
But the writing, the stuff he put in there with like, I was hoping he put some Marcion stuff in there, but whatever.
Well, and it's interesting because at the end, he kind of talks a little bit about what he feels like the writers intended. They were supposed to provide guidance, avoiding sin in the case of the Apocalypse of Peter and remaining true to one's religious commitments in the case of Perpetua, and then transition into the Acts of Thomas, which these are fascinating to me just because the stories... I was remarking to Nathaniel when we were talking about what to do to, how to structure these streams and stuff during the meeting we had a couple of days ago, that the Acts of Thomas, I want to get my hands on a copy of this just because some of the stories just recounted here by Ehrman are so much more interesting than some of the other things that ended up actually making it into the Bible.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
These are fascinating ideas. And hey, Jen.
Hey. Yeah.
Chris, I agree.
So.
I love I was talking to her earlier, a little bit earlier, and I said, the Acts of Thomas is good, but it's not the Gospel of Thomas good, and it's not even that. Gospel. The infancy Gospel of Thomas is the best. Oh my gosh! I wish that this book were about that. It's my favorite.
There is one.
And I've read on a stream the Infancy Gospel of James, which is the second best one.
Yes.
So
that's the one with the
yeah, it's with the Thanos hand.
Yeah.
So do you want to get into the explanation for who Thomas is a little bit and kind of summarize at least the first story that he talks about in the Acts of Thomas, which is Jesus selling his own brother into slavery, I guess?
Great.
So the only notes I have on this is basically like 3 sentences. The first sentence is, who the hell is Judas Thomas and why have I never heard of him?
It's apocrypha. Good old apocrypha.
And then my other question is, was the Acts of Thomas just a way to show that like 2nd century Christians knew more than just the regions mentioned in the Bible?
Yeah.
They could expand their horizons.
It was also a way to basically try to expand beyond Judea as basically that somebody who knew Jesus personally would expand beyond Judea, when Jesus himself very specifically was not, is for the Jews though.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was used as that. The oral traditions regarding his supposed twin brother Thomas, and by the way, the name Thomas means twin.
It does.
It's kind of like
yeah,
they kind of like the way that the name Barabbas means son of the Father. So Jesus is the Son of God, Barabbas is son of the Father.
That's like son of the Father. That's like the worst. What? That
yeah.
Right.
If you had an editor like that, they would be like repetition, and I don't even know how to tell you how to fix it. Just like take it out.
Yeah, it's and by the way, Chris and I could probably do an entire like day's worth of literary explanation regarding the empty Gospel of Thomas, and I'd be okay with that because it's so good.
And we could do that as a bonus episode one of these days. Like if we, if we like say after we're done with Heaven and Hell, if you guys want to cover the Gospel of Thomas for a day while people are getting the next book, we could do that.
Empty Gospel, not actual gospel. These are 2 different books. But the so have you ever heard about the story? So there is a resurrection narrative, right? That Jesus did die and he didn't actually resurrect, but rather that he had a twin brother, and his twin brother is the one that survived and basically took on the mantle as Jesus.
It's like in that one movie with Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman. What was the Magician? No, that was the Edward Norton one.
Somebody in the comments gonna get it before I think of it.
Somebody's gonna think of it. But basically, he switches places with him. Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know what the name of the movie is too, and I can't remember. Oh well. And there's actually that, and that's also not something new either, because
The Prestige.
Yeah, The Prestige. Thank you. It could be Alabama and be son of the uncle. And and by the way, name Barabbas actually means something. We get into the different passion narratives, but the name Barabbas actually means something, and there is an actual meaning to that. But you also get this idea where, and I don't remember if he mentions it in the book. And oh yeah, it's so good.
So getting into, I guess, kind of the stories that Ehrman covers here a little bit.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine being a twin brother and having your brother be your lord in that. Like, can you imagine the position that this character is put in here? Like, as an author, I'm sitting here going, what?
Yeah.
Like, Jesus doesn't trick him. Jesus just lies. I'm just saying.
No, it works out. I mean,
just lies.
In Thomas Gospels, that's kind of, Jesus is a trickster god. He's like a Loki.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Half the time, motherfucker's Loki.
Mischievous.
And by the way, one of the sins mentioned in the Apocalypse of Peter is that of a slave not obeying their master. And yes, a slave. Yeah. By the way, a slave. And that sin is punished by having their tongue gnawed on.
Ew.
Like, not in the good way, right? For all of eternity. And so this would actually kind of apply to Thomas.
So does this apply forever for like every BDSM contract that exists, or should I just not go there?
I mean, see, again, it's not the good way.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's the not good way.
Yeah, but I mean, to be honest though, with the way that Yedhovavha seems to have problems with everything, I wonder if he'd be able to tell the difference.
I mean, he's supposedly omniscient or something. I don't know.
Supposedly.
Supposedly. I mean, unless he's walking through the Garden of Eden and like doesn't know that where they are, like that. Right. Not then.
Yeah.
Nowhere.
So the in the way that it's like, why you work on the Sabbath? I'm not. Look at these live birds. That's an Infancy Gospel of Thomas thing. So Jesus or God or I forget, one of them comes and they tell Thomas, and he writes about this. They say, go to India. And Thomas is like, no.
Well, because they were like dividing up where they were supposed to go to spread the gospel. Right?
Yes, which they did not do and would not have done. Nope, they absolutely not.
Doesn't make sense.
No, yeah, because that was a Paul thing, and not go in there.
No.
Right. If I'm going to go anywhere, there's only one place I'm going to go. France. That's inside. So, and then like he says in the story, Jesus is like, I ain't having this shit. And so he goes and he starts talking to this person.
Yeah.
And I forget what this person's name ended up being.
Aban?
Yeah, it's in the
ABBAN.
Yeah. I think we actually missed something a little bit earlier.
What did we miss?
Yeah. Go back.
Well, no, you didn't. The narrative begins after Jesus has been raised from the dead. The lot for India falls to Judas Thomas.
No, I mean like earlier in the book.
Oh, what did we miss?
Go up again. Yeah, we missed something.
Yeah,
up before that even. Because it was something that I was thinking about. What's that one?
This one is the realms of the damned and blessed. What are you thinking?
The Socrates stuff is in the next chapter.
I'm not talking about Socrates. I'm not talking about Socrates.
Socrates. That one?
No, go up. Sorry, it's near like the beginning. Sorry, I am.
Is there a specific word you're looking for?
Yeah, Thomas was his twin, right? Okay.
Yeah, you said that.
So there is and Bart kind of brings this up a little bit, but he doesn't mention the actual connection between the Greeks. So this is actually how we know this book wasn't written by Thomas, it wasn't written by anybody who was around at that time. Is because it really parallels in a little bit of at least in the beginning, a certain Greek Greek mythology, which is Heracles and Iphicles, or Iphiclus, if you will. And if you don't know that story, by the way, it's fabulous. And he doesn't go into it in this book, and I'm so sad because it's one of my favorite stories. It's the one time, by the way, when Zeus comes down and he ends up having sex with somebody. He's not an animal, like besides a human. He's not a goose. And he's not a fucking he does
that a couple of times as a person.
Yeah. But either way, but this one is one of my favorites.
This is the case where like Iphicles' father and Zeus both had sex with the mother, and then she
her name is Agmina.
Yeah.
And I'm
surprised
because that's how twins work apparently.
Yeah, and so when you're a god. So what happens is Amphitryon, right? Which is kind of funny because Amphitryon is actually mentioned in the Disney version of this as a god. He's not.
Who voices that one?
I don't remember.
Damn it.
But Amphitryon is this warrior, and I am really, really sad Bart didn't put this in that book because it's so good. He's a warrior, and he's married to this person named Acmena, and he goes off to fight in this battle or whatever, this war, and Zeus is doing like his Zeus thing. He's hiding from Hera because he's probably, I don't know, raped somebody else as a snake or something.
Yeah.
And
seems about right.
He notices Akmina, and he's like, yo, girl. And she's like, nah, brah. And so he's like, all right, then. So he takes the form of her husband.
Yeah.
And he goes down and he's like, yo, girl, I came back. And she's like, what? And he's like, yeah, let's get it on. And so they do. And like a lot, so much so that Zeus loves it so much that he has the time stop. It stands still. This is in Hebraic text. And is like, yo, I'm gonna do this all night long. And so all night long ends up being a lot longer than that. But he has his fill and he leaves. And as it so happens, Amphitryon is coming back that day. And when he comes back, he's like, yo, wife. And she is not as interested as he would have hoped. Anyway,
well, part of the reason for that was because when Zeus like disguises himself, he describes the victory, because he was out in a battle. He describes the victory in such detail. He lies in such beautiful detail that he impresses her into excited sex. Yeah. So, like when her husband comes back, he tells the truth, and it's a little less interesting.
Yeah,
and she's like, "Oh, that's not as good as the story you told me earlier."
Yeah. And also, she just had a bunch of sex anyways.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I guess they have sex anyways. And she'd become pregnant by Zeus, and that would be Heracles. And she's also pregnant now by Amphitryon, and she gives birth to both of them. And you have Heracles and Iphicles, and or Hercules and Iphiclus. Whatever.
I guess both of her ovaries decided to drop an egg that week.
Yeah. And boom. And as Tony put in the comments, I give birth to a god. And so this, by the way, is kind of like that, to where Mary would have actually at this point like had sex with Joseph or something, but also with God in the way that's actually not sex, apparently, because you can't rape a 16-year-old in the Bible. And so this is like that same kind of thing. And so it's one of those things where you would actually, a person that would have made this up, not saying that they would have, but there's an opportunity for that person to have heard the stories. This would have meant that it's not in Palestine. And so putting it after at least the beginning, maybe the end of like the 2nd century. So that's how partially we know that too. But this is the oral tradition of where Thomas going to India and dying in India comes from, this apocryphal text.
Oh,
so I didn't want to get off topic. I'm sorry, but I was like, how does Bart not include this? I know he knows the story.
Okay, well, and he does briefly mention it, so this is not off topic. Explaining the reference is not off topic. This is what I meant when we were talking earlier and we were talking about deep dives. Like, this is the kind of stuff that's worth going into because it is interesting and it does actually add to the text.
Yeah, it's applicable.
This is value for the book group for people who are reading alongside us. You are providing value.
Okay, so I have a Susan version of the near-death experience of a murdered woman.
Oh,
yeah. Susan version of the near-death experience of a murdered woman.
Oh, do you want to go into how he was? Thomas became a slave, by the way.
Finish that first. That's my bad.
Okay. Yeah, Jesus tricked him into slavery to send him to India.
Yeah, he said because the reason why is because you're the slave of the master. And Jesus is like, yeah, I've got a slave. I'm the master. And then he gets Thomas and
he writes up a bill of sale before Thomas is all like aware.
Yep. And then Thomas comes up and he realizes that, yes, because Jesus is the Lord, he is his master.
Yeah.
And so he is now sold to this person and is now this person's slave. And guess what? Now you're going on the spice road to India.
Seems about right.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it.
I mean, it's like Jonah, but without the whale guts.
True.
Why do you speak in parables? So in hearing they perceive not.
All right.
Motherfucker, it ain't my fault these books are lying.
It's true. So the near-death experience of a murdered woman as told by Susan Skeptitz Turpin. So dude who had apparently just killed the woman he loved for not wanting to share the same newly found Christian faith as him and abstain from the pleasures of the flesh comes to Thomas's church to get communion for presumably the first time. Because he'd basically already been having sex with her, she was understandably upset at him not having talked it out with her beforehand. Well, instead of having a conversation like fucking adults, dude ends up flying into a rage at this entirely imagined situation of the woman having sex with someone else and fucking kills her with his sword. Slash, slash.
Yeah, as they will.
Slashes her the hell down. Not cool, man. Thomas then goes on to lecture the guy about not giving in to sins of the flesh and shit, and tells the guy to wash his hands in a sacred basin of water, and oh my god, all of a sudden he's all like healed and shit. Oh yeah, his hand was all withered and shit when he tried to take communion. I forgot to write that down.
Yeah, that's a trope. That's
a trope. That is like a withered
Thomas
hand.
Trope.
And withered hands in general are Thomas tropes.
Yes.
Well, and this is a good opportunity to say, for just as an aside, that during this era of Christianity, there was a pseudo embargo on sex even between married couples.
Yes.
So that's where the foundation of this story comes from. Because like now it's no sex before marriage. Then it was no sex even with marriage because the end is nigh within our lifetimes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think I've gone that with you before, right? Yeah. This is Paul and Jesus are both apocalypticists. And so when Paul writes in his few epistles that he wrote, the 7 of them, and he's saying, if you can, don't have sex at all. But if you can't help yourselves, have sex, because it's better for you to not defile your bodies and all that stuff, and get married basically and do that.
Yeah.
And this is because he thought that it was going to happen in his lifetime.
Yeah. And
the same thing here with, this is what the person would have said with Thomas is, and this has to do with actually something that it's actually in the Acts of Thomas as well, to where they go over there and it's Thomas on his journey over there. And as it turns out, whenever he gets there, they find this couple that are supposed to, they're getting married. And so Thomas walks up and he's like, well, I got to tell them. And he tries to basically tell them that, according to Jesus, and this is the rights of the Lord and the Master, you don't get to have sex no matter what, because it's sinful. And he doesn't do a very good job because duh. And so he basically he goes away all, saddened and everything. And they go into their bedchamber, and who do they see but Thomas? How the fuck did Thomas get in here? As it turns out, it's Jesus. And so Jesus, he of the sermons on the Mount and on the plain, if you're Luke, is much more persuasive in his rendition of "Don't you fucking have sex," but they actually don't have sex at all, even though they're married, because they saw it as sinful, because your bodies are consecrated to the Lord and it's going to happen in your lifetime.
You know how that story would have been so much better?
How?
If Jesus had joined them for a threesome, and then it really would have been sermons on the Mount.
Okay, that would only happen if Solomon was the one writing that.
Yep. He of the many wives. But yes,
so coming back to the Susan rendition of this story, now that we have appropriate cultural context, and that horrendous image has now been implanted into everybody's minds.
Yes, thank you. So his hands getting all better is not the end of the story. They go to find the woman's body and pray over it and shit, and then she gives a soliloquy about what she saw while she was dead. A lot of the same stuff that was kind of vague in the Apocalypse of Peter, but mostly having to do with sex, since that's the topic at hand.
Yep.
Jesus, presumably, came up to her and her guide through hell and said, nah, send her back. And she came back to life, which is super convenient. And rather than using this as an opportunity to welcome the woman back, because of course she's a woman who enjoys sex, and that was the whole reason she was murdered, because of an imagined scenario from the original dude, Thomas goes all fire and brimstone, tries to scare people into following his rules. I'm sorry, God's rules. Sorry, I get those two confused sometimes.
Babe.
The end.
That's
pretty. I mean, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
I think my what's my other really long one? My Gilgamesh one is my favorite, though.
Yeah.
Which nobody else wants to call Gilgamesh.
Which we might not actually be able to get to today.
We might actually have to cover chapters 2 and 3 next week, because the preface and the intro stuff took a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm cool with that.
So yeah, there's more like graphic descriptions of the afterlife in this story, which is interesting. Like the ancient creativity for all of the different horrendous ways that you could get just eternally mauled astounds me.
Yeah, they came up with some really, really amazing like punishments, and that's like they're just some awful shit, man.
Well, being written by the Greeks made it a lot easier, right? Written by Greek-speaking Christians make this a lot easier because coming out of paganism, and some of them still being pagan, right? At least in some form or fashion.
Yeah.
Having these ideas, because Jewish traditions had no version of hell.
Right.
It didn't exist at all.
Yeah.
And so that's quite another reason that was quite obvious that these were not Jews writing this, but rather these Greeks that wouldn't have been in Palestine. This is more and more the things that we just figure very easily. It doesn't take much scholarship to see that. But they have amazing story, or the Egyptians as well. You think of Osiris, who for whatever reason is named as a quote unquote dying and rising god. No, he's never raised back to life. He doesn't ever come back to life. He becomes the ruler of the underworld.
Right.
This is not a concept in Jewish history, Jewish tradition, Jewish theology. No, it's somewhere you go to sleep. And in fact, they get pissed off when you bring them back. Because in the Old Testament, this dude is brought back and he's like, why did you wake me up?
It's like Buffy.
Yeah.
When she gets all mad that they ripped her out of heaven.
Yeah. And it's like, why did you wake me up? And he doesn't stay alive either. He's never actually alive. He's like a force ghost. And he's not actually alive. He's still dead.
Yeah.
Right. And so there was no Jewish tradition of this, but in Greek and then later Roman, of course, and in Egyptian cultures, you have a lot of this stuff with these descriptions of hells, different kinds of hell.
Yeah.
Never actually called that. This is a new concept, but with the underworld type of stuff and these rulers of the underworld, that's not a new thing.
Well, the closest you get to a hell in the earlier Greek is Tartaros, and Tartaros was just where the Titans were imprisoned. It's a place of sort of darkness. Like a lot of the early Greek conceptualization of the afterlife was more basically people are just kind of in this place. Some versions of it are like the Homeric version, which is covered in chapter 3. Some of them were more like there's kind of just this place where people go, and it's basically the same as Earth, but with a few less problems, effectively. Yeah. And you don't remember who you were.
Yeah. Which, go to bed.
Well, we have one more story to get through.
Yeah, you have the this one I think is the royal brother, right?
Royal brother. Yeah.
Yep, the near-death experience of the royal brother. Another thing that happens after Thomas got tricked into India.
Yep.
Yeah. I have a Susan version of this as well, but if someone else wants to take it, please take it because there's so much Susan right now.
I do like how Bart makes sure that it's mentioned that because in that part of the Acts of Thomas, it does mention that he is a carpenter.
Yeah,
just like Jesus and of course just like Joseph. So
yeah,
I like that Bart put that there because it's important to the story, and it also shows that connection that the writers are trying to make to provide. This is part of where they try to provide some sort of authenticity to it. Like, oh, how would we know that he's a carpenter? Type stuff. And so, and I like that he put it in there, and he doesn't actually explain it, but that is the reason that they included those things in this story. So, yeah.
Makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Well, I mean, Jesus doesn't do anything carpentry in most of the Bible, so.
No, but he was known as a carpenter. So,
woodworker, as it were.
Yeah.
So does that mean Nick Offerman is Jesus?
It could be.
Could be.
So are we're doing the Susan version?
If we would like. But if you have a version, we can go for your version. My version is just the same as the other version, basically. in that it's kind of horribly told.
No, it's not horribly told. I like it.
Okay, so the near-death experience for royal brother. So you know how Thomas was a slave now because Jesus divinely sold him into slavery. Thomas's new master was named Gandaphorus.
Gondopharos?
Gondopharos.
Yeah, it's very much a Greek word. So
We'll
yeah,
say Gondopharos.
it could be Gondopharos.
But I call him Mr. G the whole entire time.
That works.
Cool.
I like it.
So
yeah, Gondopharos is how you'd pronounce it in Greek.
Cool. So I was almost entirely correct. Yay! So Mr. G asked Thomas to construct him a new palace. He apparently trusts Thomas more than he should have, because Thomas takes the money that Mr. G gives him and donates it to the poor. I mean, hey, it's a worthy cause, so that's cool. Thomas lies to Mr. G about the status of the palace and says that he needs more money for the roof, and Mr. G obliges. Now, when Mr. G comes to see his new residence, he flips out since, there's nothing there to actually see. Thomas takes the opportunity to lie again and says, oh, your palace is totally in heaven right now. So Mr. G gets mad, understandably so, and sentences Thomas to flogging and burning at the stake. But wait, that night Mr. G's brother mysteriously falls ill and dies. Gad, who is the brother, goes up to heaven and sees many residences to choose from, and then he sees a palace. He tells the guide through heaven, I don't remember exactly who it is, tells the guide through heaven that he would rather have a room in that palace than any of the other residences. And the angels tell him, I guess they were angels, the angels tell him that the palace is actually his brother's. So Gad gets all butthurt and asks to be sent back to the earth so he can ask Mr. G if he'll allow Gad to live there in the eternal dwelling. Mr. G refuses, telling Gad that he can get his own damn palace, and then releases Thomas and converts to Christianity, because why not?
Yeah. Yep, and then of course, that was a good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was really exciting.
Which completely flies in the face of the Perpetua story, because Thomas got the palace for the guy. It wasn't anything that he did. And yet, with Perpetua, it's like only you can get to heaven.
Yeah, of your own accord and stuff. So it's like, why does... I guess it's because they tricked God and he was doing those things in the name.
This is back to I'm not sure how intelligent God is as far as the BDSM question, because this story is part of the reason I asked that.
That's a good point. That's a very, very good point.
And I like how what Bart does here, and he shows how this is the exact same as the sell your possessions, give to the poor part of Luke.
Yeah.
And because your mansions are in heaven. This is a common. This is a Christian thing now.
To a certain extent. Christian thing now, to a certain extent.
For most of them, whatever.
Yeah.
And so he puts it in there, and it's fairly. If you read it, it's fairly obvious, right? Because Thomas has a larger mansion, so it's obviously metaphor.
Yeah.
And because there were no such thing as mansions back then, you had temples and palaces and stuff. But you'll have more in heaven if you give to charity today, where the thieves can't come in and take it. And so it's extrapolation from that.
Yeah.
Then he writes, and so again, that person, this is another reason that we know this was written later, is because it was written after the Gospel of Luke would have been written. And so you're talking at the end of the first into the second century. So, and also Thomas never went to India, but whatever. So I like that Bart put that in there. So.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a long tradition in Greece in particular of the idea that all art is in some way divinely inspired and contains some truth, even if it is not itself true. So the idea of, say, impersonating somebody and telling the story from first person, that's no different in these sorts of divinely inspired texts from a Greek perspective than writing a work of fiction and doing so for the purposes of, putting forward truth. There is still truth in it, and you can still say that the muses gave you this divine inspiration. So there might be some level of pagan influence from the idea that a lot of these early Christian authors did that.
It certainly is possible. I know that that the Gospel of Luke didn't have any pagan inspiration, but I think that it's not, especially because of who wrote this, it's not out of the realm of possibility that person knew Greek mythology and then had access to the Gospel of Luke as well. So or some version of the Gospel of Luke. We have 26 different manuscripts from the 2nd century. None of them actually match. So, you know.
Well, I'm not specifically talking about Greek mythology here, though. I'm talking about Greek culture and the kind of pervading worldview about what fiction and what writing is and isn't, and how those things came to be. If you were raised in that culture, you'd have that idea.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And they absolutely. You know, and then putting that into some of their writings, certainly, and the further that we are removed from Jesus, the historical Jesus, the actual person who did exist, and his followers, the more interesting the stories become.
More interesting.
Yeah, you start to get into some things about like a Peter who can fly and levitate and shit, and that's something that's written as well. So, and that's, I don't know where they got that one from, but yeah, and so it's nice that that Bart actually puts that in there and shows the correlation back to the actual text where they actually drew that entire story from. Yeah. It's a great story. Thomas, the writings about Thomas that are ascribed to Thomas are so good, and I'm so sad that none of them ever made it into the Bible.
Aww.
And well, kind of, and that people think, of course, that doubting Thomas is that Thomas, and no, you're talking about Judas here. This is Judas Thomas, and this is Jesus's brother, twin brother Thomas, and I'm like, man, come on, he may never have existed, right? But come on.
It's nice to hope.
You put 1st and 2nd Peter in there. And those, come on, there's no necessity for those outside of the fact that whenever Christians say, "What do I got to tell you why I believe?" I point to 1 Peter, 4:13 and let them know. But still.
Yeah. All right, so we're coming up on the hour-and-a-half mark. We're doing a slightly longer show this time because we had all the intro stuff. Apparently, it wasn't quite enough for us to get through the 2nd chapter.
Yeah, I also talk way too much a lot of the time, so true. That's partially my fault.
Not true.
I think you talk the least out of all of us. Stop it.
My stories were good, though? Question mark.
Yeah,
yes, they helped us get through. They helped us get through some of these stories a bit faster. I think I spent a little too long on Perpetua, but I really enjoyed reading that story. I was like, look, it's something that isn't fire and brimstone for once. Like, this is actually kind of nice.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be like, let's be here for a half a minute before we get back to people like being hung by their genitals and other, and getting their tongue zapped off and fucking eyeball lightning.
Exactly.
But, coming back, we're going to try to have this show limited to maybe an hour in the future. We'll probably go over a couple of times. We're going to have to see whether we can cover more than one chapter at a time, because today was kind of an exception. We had a lot of crap to go over at the beginning. But for those of you coming in late, this is us wrapping up really quickly. But this is the book club for Heaven and Hell by Bart Ehrman, A History of the Afterlife. We have a link in the description to pick it up from the publisher. The ebook is only $15. The hardcover is a lot more expensive at $28, but you can get it from libraries and stuff that carry ebooks, and you can get it from Amazon, I think, for a little bit cheaper than the publisher, but it's better to buy it from the publisher if you can afford it, because then the author gets the biggest cut that they can get. Whereas instead of Amazon taking 15 to 20%, and then the publisher cutting their cut, and then the author gets $1. So we're going to be covering this chapter by chapter, week by week. We're going to try to cover 2 chapters next week, 2 and 3. We'll see if we can get through them. If we can't, then we might be doing 1 chapter at a time. We're going to deep dive into bits and pieces that interest us. Today we covered the myth of Heracles and Ithacles, I think. That's one that I'm actually not as familiar with. And we talked a little bit about the difference between the story of Perpetua, which describes heaven, and Dante's Paradiso, which I thought was kind of fascinating. The differences between the two. Paradiso is much, much later. And we went into each of the different sections of chapter 1, where he talks about the various forms of hell and kind of where they came from. In the next chapter, the last section of chapter 1 talks about how, in order to figure out why these stories of the afterlife don't line up with the early Christianity and with the stories in the Bible itself, we kind of have to go back and look at earlier conceptualizations of the afterlife. So in the next chapter, we're going to be getting into some Sumerian mythology and the life and death of Socrates. And in the chapter after that, he talks about the Homeric conceptualization of the afterlife and its influence on the Greek world, which I have a few issues with the way that he describes that, just because there were various philosophical schools that proposed other forms of the afterlife, though he's probably right that the Homeric had a heavy influence on the layperson. So, yeah, that's basically what we're going to be getting into next week. Do you guys have any final words that you want to cover or anything? Check out their channel if you guys aren't already subscribed. It's such a small audience that we have right now, so any of you that aren't subscribed, what the hell are you doing with your lives? There's a link to their channel in their description as well.
Divine Disbelief!
Yeah, we have a show tomorrow night.
Yes, we do.
At 5:30 Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever time that is for you, figure that out. And going over tomorrow was going to be part 2 of our deep dive into controversy that was going on, kind of still is going on in Hawkins, Texas. But instead, we decided to take a 1-week hiatus from that one, or push that one back a week. Mm-hmm. And tomorrow we're going over something that I find incredibly important and incredibly interesting as well. Not that I don't find everything that we do incredibly important and interesting. And so you'll want to check into that. I promise. It's
going to be good.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. She's going to go over the news and stuff too. Yep. And it's going to be a great time. It won't take more than an hour of your time. I promise. And you're either going to like it or you're going to hate it. So it's going to be one of those two. But you'll come in and you'll learn something.
It's true.
I promise.
That's very true.
Oh yeah. It's been a fun few days for me. So and nobody knows why. That's okay. But yeah, we do that. And then I think we're going to be on a show on Friday, right? Atheist Asshole and them.
Yes.
Doing an Atheist Roundtable.
6 o'clock?
I think so.
Our time?
I think so. Sounds right. And then Saturday morning, we're going to be on Daily Atheist.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I'm excited for that one.
You guys are going to be everywhere all over YouTube the next couple of days.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And I don't have time to do anything because we're still putting together a premiere video.
Yeah.
We're responding to somebody and still putting that together. I got to write that script, but I still have to finish writing stuff for tomorrow. How did I do this when I was actually working? Like, how did I do any of this stuff before a pandemic?
We weren't doing nearly as much.
That's fair. But I don't have the time right now.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, creative pursuits can exhaust you significantly more than like just job stuff does, I've noticed. Like when I switched from working a day job to just doing writing and YouTube stuff, I noticed that I was far, far more drained by the end of the day. And it's a draining that you can't really describe. It's like it's an exhaustion that happens in your brain as well as your body.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I've had a lot of fun. Staying up late, waking up early. And it's fun when you sit down next to Susan, who has no idea what the fuck I'm going to talk about. And then I say, I'm trying to figure out how to put this in order. And then I go into all of this stuff. And she's looking at me like she is right now. And I'm like, because I've got all of this and I want to do this. And I know that there's no way that she's never heard this stuff before. And I'm just like, I'm basically trying to just put it in order in myself, but be away from the computer. And then she gives me input and it works. So I don't know. I know it does.
Something.
It does.
Well, and as much as you crapped on yourself, Susan, I'm glad that you came, honestly. Like, I'm really glad to have your input and, you know, the questions and the snark and all of the fun. Like, I feel like you and I are kind of in the same position on this one in that neither of us knows all that much about this particular era in history. And so we're kind of bouncing lots of things off of everywhere, and it's nice.
Yeah. I like it when she comes, too.
Hello.
That's a sick joke. Thanks,
all right,
everybody,
guys.
for coming.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming. We're going to try to host this show at around the same time every week on Tuesdays, assuming that nothing changes with their schedule, because my schedule is pretty much open, but the two of them have job stuff eventually, so we're trying to keep it on Tuesdays at 7:30 PST / 10:30 EST. If y'all are able to stay up, come join us for our book club. And like I said, we're going to keep going chapter by chapter. When we get close to the end of this one, we're going to put up a list of things for you guys to vote on off of our list. We're not going to be doing a lot of the really controversial stuff, just probably things that you guys haven't had a chance to read yet. And yeah, let's spread some education around. Let's come together as a community over something that isn't drama for once, right?
Yes, coming together. Always try it.
All right, have a good night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the first episode of Secular Literary Circle, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye, buddy.